We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Pat Kinsel. He is the CEO and founder of Notarize. Pat, thank you for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including, your pronouns and when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm Pat Kinsel, like you said, founder and CEO of Notarize. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, in the city, and I grew up in the Bay Area. Growing up in the Bay Area, back when I did, I was surrounded by the technology industry and really a lot of the excitement that, people now talk about the dot-com, crash. Prior to the crash, living as a kid in that community, there was so many amazing things that were happening. So I actually, when I was 8 and 10 years old, told people I wanted to be a venture capitalist, which I think is, and a hilarious thing for a kid to say. And at times I gave up on that dream, although it ultimately came true for me. But that's what I wanted to do as a kid. I've always wanted to be involved in the technology ecosystem. I grew up on the Stanford campus for a period of time, and that's when Google was coming out, and the university had supported it. So it's been an obsession my entire life. So I'm happy to be here today and happy to talk about that experience.
Wow, I must say that you are the first kid who have answered, I want to be a venture capitalist. But with that background, that makes sense. You fast forward to now, you founded and are the CEO of Notarize. How do you think your personal journey has really led you up until this point?
Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to be involved in the technology ecosystem. I was always amazed how you could build something, and especially with the advent of the internet, that it could be distributed and impact so many people so quickly. I'm not an engineer, and I have tried to learn to write code in my life, and it's just not happening for me, right? So, really, I looked around, and my dad's good friend was a venture capitalist. That's how I was exposed. So really, I would just wanted to be like, my dad's cool friend. So I was looking for ways to get involved in the startup, economy and technology and things like that, but gave up on that vision for a long period of time, and ultimately got my first job. And I was just managing a tech project for this tiny little company. And I said to myself, well, sure, I can do this. I'm good, right? I'll start a company. And so had a number of failures. Ultimately started a company that I sold to Twitter back in 2013. Mm-hmm. And with that, I had to get a document notarized, and I got the thing notarized, and the person screwed it up. They stamped it but didn't sign it, and it caused all this pain for me. So that's when I said, oh my God, like I've stumbled into this, really impactful, simple, boring problem that people can understand. And so that was about 7 years ago now, and I've dedicated my life since to the company and to doing it.
I love that. There's got to be a better way, especially when you go through that personal experience, and being in the tech space, obviously something that you're really passionate about as well. I'm sure that there are many things, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, that you handle and are thinking about, but what's a current problem you're trying to solve right now? What's taking up the most brain space in Pat's mind?
I mean, a lot. It's funny. I always thought, if I just raise that next round, this will get easier. And the realization is it never gets easier. If anything, the more people and the more customers, the more the complexities compound. But really right now, maybe to answer your question 2 different ways. So internally, super focused on alignment. And I actually read this great post recently out of the team at DFJ, where they talk about sort of the path of going from a startup to a small medium company to a big medium company to a large company and whatnot. And really this transition from being a company where there's a few people who, can do what they describe as heroes work, right? They can come in and parachute into any situation, and really having to evolve to a company where you can spread that knowledge throughout the organization and really empower people to do what they need to do and to make decisions at the edge of the organization and to be aligned. And so as a company, we're really focused now on trying to explain what we do to more people and get people to understand how their work really, contributes to the mission. So that's the internal challenge. Externally, we're undergoing a big transition from really being a product to a platform, and really wanting more customers to innovate on top of our platform. And we've continued to launch SDKs and APIs and all sorts of things like that, and really trying to support more and more industries and use cases, and really build an innovation economy around the company. And that's a huge culture change. It's a huge change to every aspect of how we build, how we market, how we engage customers and partners. And so those are probably the two things right now that are occupying the most of my time.
Yeah, that's enough to take up some space there. I think a lot of companies are thinking about culture, and to your point too, how to make sure that employees and kind of your team feels like they are contributing to the mission of the company. The company is of course different than 7 years ago. I'm sure your leadership style has adjusted a bit as well as time has gone on and you've added more teammates. I want to ask, in terms of measuring your effectiveness as a leader, how does that translate to how you think about the performance of the folks that you manage, and your team at large?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. And so when I talk to other entrepreneurs who are a little behind me in the journey, I'm always talking to people who are just ahead of me, and trying to pass that knowledge also to people just behind us. And so what I say is, as the CEO or founder of the business, be someone people want to work with, right? And I think when I think about that, that means be someone that people can learn from, and be someone that people enjoy working with. And so there's really two, I think, easy measures to ask yourself if you're succeeding there. And one is the talent that you're attracting to the business, right? So are you, and is the company at large, a team that people want to work with and want to learn from? And if so, you're going to attract great talent. And the other one is retention. Are people choosing to stay inside the organization, or are they leaving, right? So if you just look who's coming in and who's staying, you can get a pretty good barometer. Maybe to flip the performance question on its head, rather than saying, are we getting everything we want or need out of our employees and team? I think an interesting question is to ask, are we building a culture and company where people can do the best work of their lives, right? And if your team comes and they feel that, and there's always going to be new challenges and opportunities, and because of the infrastructure and support and whatnot, they're going to get to do the best work of their lives, they're going to stay, right? And so that's what I'm really focused on these days. And it goes back to alignment and making people feel like they're a part of a larger vision, to understand why they're staying. So that's how we try to orient our thought around team and performance, and how do we support folks to do that work.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of a leader or a people manager's role as well. How can you set up systems, processes, and really operationalize how people can do the best work of their lives? And I think part of that too, especially right now, a lot of people, especially on either remote first or a hybrid team, they want to be seen and heard by the people that they work with. They want to be tied to the mission of their company and really create that trust with their employer as well. How do you see employee feedback management or active listening going on at Notarize really manifesting at the organization at large?
Yeah, this is a challenge and something I'm still dealing with. And I don't have all the answers. We do all the obvious things. So we do the internal employee ENPS surveys, and we get data on do people feel heard, happy, et cetera. We do company meetings where we regularly, myself and the leadership team get up, and that's more of a kind of a few to many dialogue explaining the direction we're going. I do tea times where I try to bring one topic that's just on my mind and really try to pull people into the discussion and try to evolve into really an open forum for questions and answers. At the end of the day, though, I think for me to really sort of keep a beat on what's happening, the reality is there's just some people who are very direct and honest, right? And I think as we've grown the company, one of the benefits we've had with a lot of those people staying is they're the ones who call me and say, hey, like, this is junk, or these people are in fact unhappy. And I think as we're all adapting to remote first as a culture, those sort of hallway opportunities where someone might say something that they don't want to put into a forum, or they really say, hey, look, I just want to tell you what's on my mind. You have to really be intentional to create opportunities for that, right? So I've been more intentional about talking to the people that I know are sort of more direct and honest with their feedback, and really trying to keep a beat on what's going inside the organization. But it's a challenge, and it can be done. Like anything, intentionality, I think, is what's most important.
Yeah, effective communication, a two-way conversation, and it sounds like offering a multitude of ways for people to reach you, Pat, but also just provide feedback at large to the company. Again, meeting folks where they are as well, depending on how comfortable they are in being candid, and it helps the organization overall as well in terms of innovation. And to your second point of retention too, I want to shift gears as well to talk about something that a lot of folks have been working on over this past year too, in terms of strengthening diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies. For your role specifically as the leader of the organization, how do you see kind of the CEO really contributing to the overall DEI strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I agree. There's a lot of really good work happening across the industry and within the company. And the reality is, most of the great work is not being led by me. We've got some people that I won't go through all the names. If they're listening, they know who they are, right? And they're really sort of the heart of this for us. I think the inclusion word, though, it's interesting. So for us as a company, you start out as a 4 and 5 person team, and you get to 20, and now we're 400. So a lot of the things you did back in the day, they weren't sort of intentional that, when we're a 400 person company, we want to lay, the groundwork. We were just trying to solve the challenges we had then, right? And trying to, frankly, just get off the ground. So I think what's interesting for me is I am a young parent, and in the history of the company, I was very surprised early on when I would bring my kids into the office, the reaction that people had. I can't believe this is a kid-friendly company, right? I'm like, I live nearby, my kids are coming by. I would see other people start to bring their kids in, right? And I realized that sort of just actually leading by example, it created this space for other people to do the same. Same for taking paternity time and these things, right? It creates this culture of someone's whole self, right? So I think as a company, we've really embraced the notion that people have a life outside of work, right? You may have kids or hobbies or whatnot, and that if you really maintain your whole self, that you're a better employee, teammate, you have interests, you get fresh perspective. So I think for us as a company, we've always just valued that. And I say, we don't want to dominate your life, right? We just want to be a really important part of your life, right? So if you start there and you start to just broaden the aperture, I think my job is the CEO of the company is to really explain the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Which is that if we want to be a company that serves, the country during life's most important moments and really deliver service with empathy, well, then we need a team that represents, that diverse country, right? And so that plus all the surveys and data, like, I don't need to go into them here. Everyone who looks should know that having a more diverse, team leads to better business performance and whatnot. So for me, I think it's about just really having an inclusive, culture as to people bringing their whole self to work. It's really rooting that this isn't just a nice thing. It's actually imperative for us to be successful, right? So this is not a nice to have, but a must have. And then I think it's really just allowing the conversation, right? So I read some companies that have shut it down, and I've made very clear to the whole company that we're not going to end the dialogue, right? And we're going to continue to discuss it. So when I said we do these fireside chats, a lot of, if not most of the questions are actually around topics of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we now have people in 41 states, right? So we're remote first in 41 states. So we have very different diverse perspectives. And I think a lot of really healthy, dialogue. And then the last thing, of course, is just fostering a culture of, trust and respect, right? So that we can have these discussions in a way that's not, doesn't tear people down. It's about solving the problem. So I think we're very fortunate to have good early bones, and to have been very fortunate to hire some early people who really care about these things, and they've been sort of the stewards of them internally. But every company's on their own journey, and we certainly have room for improvement too. But I do think we're trying hard.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of intention behind the strategy you just outlined as well. And in terms of, this being a need to have in terms of not a nice to have, and really valuing the full person inside and outside of work is really important. I like how you mentioned the modeling the behavior of inviting your kids to come to work so other people know that it's okay too. And oftentimes I hear leaders marking down doctor's appointments or picking kids up or dropping kids off from school on their calendars to make sure it's public as well. And also taking time to recharge and fully come back to work refreshed and ready to hit the ground running. There's nothing better than the gift of time. You can never make more of it. And I noticed that you gave Notarize employees a week off this year, specifically called, I think it was Operation chillaxed, and it was a quick turnaround in terms of executing this strategy. You saw that people, might have been burned out and they needed some time with family, friends, and just to recharge. Can you give another example of how you've innovated over the past 18 months, 2 years, whether it's a process, initiative, or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of examples I can give. During the pandemic, we were very quick to come out with a redefinition of PTO. So it wasn't paid time off, it was pandemic time off, and really, mandated that people would take one day, off a week. I think what's interesting as we get larger, some of the things I hear from folks who've been here longer is, hey, we don't want to become too corporate. We want to be a company that can make decisions, right, and can have vision and act. So part of the Operation Chillax was really about demonstrating we can still do that, right? And doesn't matter how big we are, if it's the right thing to do, we'll do it. And to your earlier point, I had gone on vacation just, earlier in the summer, and I debated if I wanted to share that with the team or not. Normally you might hide the fact that you're going on vacation, right? And I just decided, I was like, no, I'm going to put it on my calendar. I'm telling everyone that I'm going, and I got to see the benefit of actual time off. I told people, like, call me only if the place is on fire, right?
Right.
And coming back, I realized how much I needed that, and how much, the team, and of course everyone says, well, Pat, you get to do that. You're the CEO, right? And I said, well, to hell with that, right? Let's do it, right? But just to answer your question, another example was when COVID hit, we were just massively, inundated by volume. And as a whole team, within about a week, we decided to change our whole fulfillment strategy and move to a marketplace model for notaries and build self-service tools. And I love that. Like, going back to being someone who wanted to be in the startup game my whole life, you just live for these moments where the pressure's on and you have more demand, right? Like, imagine that, like, oh my God, too many people want to use our service.
Yeah.
And so I've read all these books on what you do, and you don't just optimize, you redesign, and you have to make bold decisions. And so that was really a fun time for me and for a lot of people on the team. It was super stressful. This was in April, right as COVID was taken off and people worked around the clock. But that was really fun for me.
Yeah, I mean, with great challenges, there's a huge opportunity to really contribute as well. And of course, not all businesses experience that too. So it's a really interesting way of redesigning and thinking about the platform at large too. And you mentioned that people don't want to become too corporate. Retention is really important, and just having that candidness in the workplace. And I think you mentioned you're in 41 states now, pretty large team. As you continue to grow, and I think Notarize was also on one of the lists of like the fastest growing private companies. As you continue to expand your team, how are you thinking about intentionally scaling company culture? Is it something that you can scale, or is it always going to be changing, as many people comes in, and that's how it should be?
It's a great question. It's really hard. And then we were 114 on the list, not that anyone's paying very close attention, but for me, it really gets to the heart of what is company culture, right? And what are the things that we really care about? And when I think about that, we have this yes before no, mandate. Like, and as a company, we're the team you call when you can't figure something out. So I say we're a product and policy led organization. If you're trying to sell a car on the internet, you can't figure it out, you call us. If you're trying to sell a home, you call us. So I think the most important thing I want in the team is that this sense of optimism. We can go build something, or we can go understand or influence, the policies and regulations to accomplish something. We're going to do it, right? And I think that's, to me, the most important thing to really, maintain across the company. But it's hard right now. I think that when people are joining a company like ours that's remote first, they're leaving an organization that's saying you have to come back into the office, right? So at first, they're very excited to find a company that is willing to embrace this, new reality. But the question ultimately is like, what's the vision of my employee experience going to be, right? And how often are we going to get together? Am I going to get to see my teammates, right? And what's that culture of getting together for key problem solving and collaboration opportunities, building relationships, et cetera. And I felt we had a good sense, and now with sort of the resurgence of COVID, I think we've taken a step back. But companies like ours, this is the next great challenge, I think, is what's the rhythm of the business going forward when people are in 41 states?
What's the rhythm? What's the connection? What's keeping you here? Again, having that dialogue, not having it be a one-sided conversation and asking how people are feeling. I think that's definitely part of the company culture. I know we started off the conversation talking about your personal journey to this work and talked about Notarize's strategy at large, but I'm going to bring it back to you,
Okay.
conversation, and ask, I mean, you mentioned in one of your answers, you don't have all the answers. And I think that's good for people to know that leaders sometimes don't have all the answers. So when was the last time you had a learning moment where you learned something different or had that aha moment?
So I constantly tell the team that every day this is the largest organization I've ever run. And so to your point, I'm literally making this up as I go, trying to get the best, advice, that I can get, and bring in people with more experience and consider their history or their knowledge, right? So for me, the thing that I continually learn over and over again, and I know this is very trite and cliche, but around communication and everyone having a different way of learning and listening and whatnot, um, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of intentionality. So, pre-COVID, we already had some other offices, so we did a lot of recorded sessions and people could watch them asynchronously. So we were in a good spot. But now it's interesting. I find if I write something, either strategy or problems, there's a whole group of people that get super excited about it. If I record something, there's a group of people that get excited about it. But it's really hard to do them all at once, right? And that's something I'm really still, trying to work on. So I'd say I'm constantly sort of relearning the value of really thoughtful, deliberate communication in multiple modes, to multiple different audiences at the same time across the company. And it's just interesting the infrastructure that you build as a company over time to accomplish that. We've brought in some amazing people to lead a learning and development, program. Ultimately, what I've learned is that it doesn't all have to be on me, and there are really skilled and knowledgeable people that know how to do these things and support them at scale. So
I think that's a good one. I think it's important to, just like when we were in school, people learn things and communicate in different ways. So just making sure that people are aware of what's going on and it's not all on you, and bringing in those folks to have a conversation is really important. How would you finish the sentence? In order for companies to be successful in the future, CEOs need to
be empathetic. That's what I would say. And just to maybe put something around that. So, prior to COVID, I think it was pretty commonly accepted, worldview that hybrid would not work, right? You either had to be totally in office or totally remote, right? And if you unpack some of that, it was really because that the in-office people would always treat the remote people differently. There would be sort of a favoritism or easier advantage for the people that were in office, right? So in my mind, what's really changed, post COVID, is everyone to some extent is remote, right? It could be that they were for a year. It could be that they are 3 days a week or 4 days a week. And what I believe is that really creates a better opportunity to have empathy for, your colleagues' work experience, right? Someone who has, children in the home, whatever it may be, the circumstance, caring for, an elder parent or, whatnot. And so I just think that, presuming positive intent and being empathetic, that we're trying to fit into people's lives so that they can do the best work of, their career here, I think it's a big challenge, but I think we're rising to that. So
I think we're leaning into a lot of empathetic leadership, equity-driven leadership, and really having that conversation about what's going on in people's lives outside of work. Again, wanting work to be a really great part of what you're doing as well, being mission-driven and feeling like your work actually has an impact at the company and in the community at large. What is something folks would be surprised to know about you?
to know about me. So some folks do know this, but for the audience, I did not finish college. And I think that's relevant in this discussion because, from a talent perspective, you hear about companies like Google that, you had to have a PhD and do 95 backflips to get a job.
Sure.
I think the reality is, we're in a world today where people can have different paths to demonstrate their, intellect and ability. And if I didn't finish college, how can I project that requirement on others, right? So as a company, we're really trying hard. And I think it's related to the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is, when you think about a job you want to put on your website, what are all the ways that someone could demonstrate they're qualified for it? Not just that they, were on a sales team in a SaaS startup for 5 years. What are the sort of the adjacent experiences that really broaden the aperture of the people that you can look at? So that's very much my own lived experience, right? I don't have the traditional credentials required to do my job. And so we want to be creative thinking about, the whole employee base and how they can demonstrate their ability.
Big proponent of inclusive job descriptions and looking at people's versatile talents and experiences. Lived experiences is, I think, the language that you used as well, because it is very related to different roles, and you don't need to have all of these years of experience in one linear path. The path is usually not that linear.
Yes.
As well. So thank you for sharing that, and also modeling that from a leadership perspective too. Is there anything that I either didn't ask that you want to share with our audience, or 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope listeners bring with them after listening to our discussion?
Yeah, I would just reemphasize that I think employees really want a vision for their work experience. When we decided to go remote first, the rationale was, look, the only thing in our control is being great at this. So let's just be great at it and take full advantage, right? And find amazing talent across the country and go for it. And we did. And now we're in 41 states. But the real problem, I think, is unsolved. So if you're out there and you're considering, the own vision for your company, is not enough to just say people can work from home. You really have to think through, what it means. And we're still working on it. I'm happy to share progress, along the way. I think the other thing is that, as a company, we offer remote online notarization. Our entire, pitch is that you can continue life's most important transactions no matter where you are in the world. So our whole vision and philosophy is totally aligned with this, remote world. But I think if you're an entrepreneur, an aspiring entrepreneur out there, the fact that people are at home, it creates so many opportunities for innovation. Everything that people would do in an office, all of sort of the process and legal requirements and walk down the hall and do this needs to be reimagined. And I think that, software has initially made a bunch of progress around collaboration, but there's this whole second order of business process and workflow and identity verification and compliance. And that's a space that we're certainly playing in, but it's a really, I think, fertile ground for innovation. And I encourage people to think about the things that are hard for them sitting at their desk and to build solutions to make it easier.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call to action as well. There's a huge opportunity for redesign, inclusive design, and really not doing things as they've been done before, breaking the status quo and making sure you're thinking creatively as well. Pat, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture and for sharing your kind of personal journey with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we believe in that employee feedback management and know that listening to all employees is a requirement for the company to succeed. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.